It began with a funeral no one attended. A cold November morning, wet with fog and lined with the cypress stillness of Charleston's Magnolia Cemetery. Rain wept onto the casket, a modest pine box buried beneath an unmarked stone. A man in black stood alone under an umbrella, not as mourner, but as witness. A final signature in a long-forgotten ledger. No name was spoken. No prayers were read. And yet, this was the end of someone once called the voice of salvation by the townsfolk. The preacher who vanished in 1856. The man whose sermons once filled church pews and spilled into cobbled streets. A man both revered and feared. His name was Elijah Harrow. Back then, he walked with a kind of grace that made the poor believe in angels and the rich question their sins. Tall, with saltbrush hair and eyes that held the weight of oceans. Every Sunday, people gathered not for the word, but for his word, because he didn't just preach, he bled. Each sermon was a confession wrapped in fire. But no one knew the man behind the pulpit. By candlelight, Elijah wrote letters he never sent. He walked the shoreline at night, staring toward the horizon as though it promised escape. He visited graves. He never spoke of family. He kept a locket tucked in a hollow behind his desk, sealed tight with a cloth stained from rain and tears. What was missing was not faith. It was peace. And when you looked close enough, you could see the way it haunted him. In the quiet pauses between verses, in the way his fingers trembled when he touched a child's head for blessing, as if he feared love itself. The town of Charleston adored him, but adoration is not intimacy. And so it was one Sunday morning in July 1856 that Elijah stood to deliver his sermon and never arrived. The church bells rang. The congregation waited. But the pulpit remained empty. The sanctuary echoed only with wind. For weeks they searched. For months they prayed. Some said he fled. Others whispered darker things. But no body was found. No note. Just a lingering ache of absence. Until now, that unmarked grave, decades later, would stir questions never answered and open the door to the story that no one ever told. Elijah Harrow was not born to grace, but a grief. He came from the hills of Kentucky, the son of a drunken war vet, and a mother who died giving birth to his younger sister. At 15, he left home with only a Bible and a locket, a picture of her face inside. He wandered, worked odd jobs, learned to read by firelight. By 20, he had found the Lord. Or perhaps the Lord had found him, among tobacco fields and frostbitten nights. But his faith wasn't blind. It was born of loss. In Charleston, he was taken in by an older pastor, Reverend Whitmore, who saw in Elijah a rare gift. His sermons, fierce and lyrical, drew in hearts like a tide. But Elijah's sermons were always tinged with sorrow, as if he spoke to ghosts instead of men. There was one woman who broke through, Clara Jean Atwood, a schoolteacher with ink-stained fingers and a laugh that could undo silence. She challenged him, teased him, made him feel. They met often, at first for discussions on scripture, then for walks, then for evenings that blurred lines between sacred and human. And Elijah, for a moment, believed he might be saved from himself. But Clara had a secret, and when she whispered it on a warm April night, it shattered him. She was with child. In another time, another life, it might have been a blessing. But not here. Not now. A preacher unmarried. A woman independent. In Charleston, this wasn't scandal, it was ruin. The church elders warned him. The congregation whispered. Elijah stood in the pulpit week after week, speaking of mercy while being offered none. When Clara miscarried, alone in her home during a storm that split trees in half, Elijah was delivering a sermon on the sanctity of family. He arrived too late. She was alive, but changed. Her light dimmed. And Elijah, he never forgave himself. He buried the locket with the tiny bundle she named Hope. From that day on, he preached not to save others, but to punish himself. And the man they all admired was slowly drowning beneath robes of grace. And then one day, a letter arrived. From Kentucky. From someone who should have been long dead. The letter was folded neatly, addressed in a trembling hand. No return name. Just a single sentence on the back of the envelope. She remembers you. Inside was a brittle page, the ink faded, but the message clear. His sister, Miriam, alive. He had believed she died in the fire that consumed their childhood home. But she hadn't. She had survived, sent to an orphanage, tracked him down after 20 years. She wanted to see him, forgive him, reconnect. Elijah held the letter for days, then weeks. He sat at his desk in the chapel, staring at it beneath the lamplight, torn between past and present, between guilt and grace, between the man he had become and the boy he had left behind. It rained the night he made his decision, thick southern rain, drumming on rooftops like the pulse of old memories. He left behind his robes, his journals, his name. He left everything. They say a man walked barefoot to the harbor that night, wearing only a coat and clutching a small box. Witnesses remember the figure, soaked and silent, boarding a freighter bound for New Orleans. From there, he vanished. But Elijah did not die. He lived under a different name in a small bayou town, tending a church no one visited, caring for orphans and drifters. He reunited with Miriam, who was dying consumption, and sat by her bed every night until her final breath. He never preached again, until one Sunday, 30 years later, when an old woman stumbled into the chapel in tears and asked if he could pray for her dying son. Elijah stood behind the pulpit for the last time and spoke not of sin, not of wrath, but of love, unseen, undeserved, unrelenting. And when the boy passed, Elijah whispered the name he had once buried, Hope. Elijah Harrow died in 1889 in a shack by the marshes, surrounded by no family, only strangers who loved him. He left no memoir, no sermon transcripts, just a worn Bible filled with marginal notes, tear stains, and a single photograph, Clara, holding a child. He was buried with no name. But those who knew him, who heard his final prayers, who were lifted by his quiet presence, spoke of a man who had once fallen, but had walked through fire to find peace. A story never told in Charleston. A man remembered only in whispers. Until now, because some disappearances are not escapes. They are journeys, necessary, sacred, painful. Elijah Harrow did not vanish. He transformed, from preacher to penitent, from orator to servant, from a man of God to a man with God. And the moral he never preached, but lived, was this: sometimes the greatest redemption is not found in being seen, but in quietly becoming the person you once prayed you could be. In the end, the grave held no name, but the story it contained was never about fame. It was about a man who learned, too late, but not too little, that love, even lost, can still light the way back home. And that is the untold story of the famous preacher who disappeared. Charleston, 1856.